Why am I being investigated for a student who left my class and was found 3 states away with a 26-year-old man? I have been teaching high school English for 14 years. I love my job. I love watching students discover books that change how they see the world. I love the moment when a struggling kid finally understands something they've been working on for weeks. I have taught over 2,000 students, and I have never once had a complaint filed against me. Not one parent meeting that ended badly. Not one disciplinary issue. I say this because of what happened last October and what people are now saying about me. There was a girl in my 3rd period class named B. She was 16 years old and sat in the back row near the window. She was quiet and didn't participate much, but she turned in her work on time and seemed to do fine on tests. I didn't know much about her personal life because she never shared anything in class discussions. Some students are like that, and I learned a long time ago not to push. In early October, B started acting different. She seemed distracted during lectures. She would stare at her phone under the desk even though phones weren't allowed. She stopped turning in homework. Her test scores dropped. I pulled her aside after class one day and asked if everything was okay. She said she was fine and just tired. I told her my door was always open if she needed to talk. She nodded and left without saying anything else. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, B raised her hand in the middle of class. She asked if she could use the restroom. I said yes. She grabbed her backpack, which was unusual because students normally leave their things at their desks. I noticed but didn't say anything because sometimes girls need to bring their bags to the bathroom. She walked out of my classroom at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. She never came back. When the bell rang 40 minutes later and B's seat was still empty, I reported it to the front office. They said they would look into it. By the end of the school day, her parents had been called. By that evening, the police were involved. B was officially missing. The next 3 days were chaos. Police interviewed students. They interviewed teachers. They interviewed me 4 separate times. They wanted to know exactly what B said before she left. They wanted to know if I noticed anything strange about her behavior. They wanted to know why I let her take her backpack to the bathroom. Her parents came to the school on the 2nd day. Her mother walked straight up to me in the hallway and started screaming. She said I let her daughter walk out of my class and did nothing. She said I should have known something was wrong. She said a real teacher would have stopped her. She said this was my fault and she would make sure everyone knew it. Her father stood behind her nodding and saying I should lose my job. The principal pulled them away, but the damage was done. Other teachers heard. Students heard. Word spread through the school that B's parents blamed me for her disappearance. The local news ran a story that week. They didn't use my name, but they said a teacher was under investigation for negligence. They said a student vanished from a classroom and no one noticed for 40 minutes. They made it sound like I just let a child walk into danger without caring. My own students started looking at me differently. Parents requested transfers out of my class. I received emails from strangers calling me horrible things. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept replaying that moment in my head, wondering if I should have done something different. Then 6 days after B disappeared, the police found her. She was in a motel in another state with a 26-year-old man named Doug. He worked at a car wash near her house. They had been talking online for 8 months. He had been picking her up from school on days she told her parents she had club meetings. She had been planning to run away with him for weeks. She packed that backpack the night before. She knew exactly what she was doing when she asked to use the bathroom. She chose my class because it was right before the end of the day, and she knew she could get a head start before anyone noticed. The police brought her home. Doug was arrested. B admitted everything to investigators. She said no teacher could have stopped her because she had been planning this for months. She said she chose to leave and it had nothing to do with me or anyone else at school. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought once the truth came out, people would apologize and move on. I was wrong. B's parents held a meeting with the school board. They demanded I be fired for letting their daughter leave the classroom. They said I should have recognized the signs. They said I should have refused to let her take her backpack. They said a competent teacher would have prevented this. They never once mentioned Doug. They never once mentioned that their daughter had been sneaking around with a grown man for almost a year while living under their roof. They never once mentioned that they had no idea who their own daughter was talking to online every single night. They blamed me because blaming me was easier than admitting they missed everything. The school board launched a formal investigation. I sit in my empty classroom after the final bell rings. The fluorescent lights hum overhead while I stare at my computer screen. The email came through at 3:45. Subject line reads, Formal Investigation Notice. The school board scheduled my first interview for next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I have 72 hours to prepare a written statement explaining why I let a student walk out of my classroom with her backpack. My hands shake as I read the email a second time. They want me to explain what I was thinking when B asked to use the restroom. They want me to explain why I didn't stop her from taking her bag. They want me to explain why I didn't somehow know she was planning to run away with a grown man. I close my laptop and sit in the silence. The classroom feels different now. The desks where students sat just hours ago look empty and accusatory. I taught in this room for 9 years. I decorated these walls with posters about classic literature and quotes about the power of reading. I graded thousands of essays at this desk. Now I'm being investigated for doing my job the same way I've always done it. I grab my phone and search for the teacher's union number I've never needed before. My finger hovers over the call button for a minute. Calling the union makes this real. It means I actually need help. It means this investigation could actually hurt me. I press the button. The phone rings 3 times before someone picks up. A man answers and says his name is Nathan Velasquez. I start talking and can't stop. I tell him everything about B and the bathroom pass and the backpack and the parents and the police and the school board meeting. Nathan doesn't interrupt once. He just listens while I pour out the whole story in one long stream of words. When I finally stop talking, he's quiet for a few seconds. Then he tells me this is serious enough that I need union representation at every meeting from now on. His voice is calm, but I can hear the concern underneath. He says he'll be at my interview on Tuesday, and that we need to meet before then to prepare. I feel a tiny bit of relief knowing someone will be there with me, but mostly I just feel scared. Nathan explains that the school board investigation is separate from the police investigation. Even though B admitted everything to the police about planning this for months, the board can still find me negligent under district policy. The police cleared me because I didn't do anything criminal. But the school board has different standards. They can decide I failed to provide adequate supervision even if I didn't break any laws. Nathan says we need to document every interaction I had with B. We need to establish that I followed all standard procedures. He asks if I keep detailed records of my classes. I tell him I have grade books and attendance sheets and lesson plans. He says to gather everything from September and October. Every assignment B turned in. Every time she was absent or tardy. Every grade she received. We need to build a timeline showing I did my job properly. He says he'll call me tomorrow to set up a meeting time. I hang up and stare at my phone. The word negligent keeps running through my head. I've never been negligent. I've never been anything but careful and responsible with my students. I spend the weekend going through my gradebook. I pull out attendance records. I print my lesson plans from the weeks before B disappeared. I spread everything across my kitchen table and start making notes. B turned in her summer reading essay on time in early September. She scored an 82. She attended class regularly through the first 3 weeks. Her quiz grades were average but consistent. Then in the first week of October, everything changed. She missed 2 assignments in 1 week. Her test score dropped from an 85 to a 67. I have notes from when I pulled her aside after class. October 8th. Asked if everything was okay. Student said she was fine, just tired. The records show exactly what I remember. A normal student who completed work and attended regularly until those final 2 weeks when her behavior changed. I followed protocol. I noticed the change. I reached out to her privately. I offered support. Everything I'm supposed to do as a teacher. But looking at these papers now, I wonder if it will be enough. The school board isn't looking for evidence that I did my job right. They're looking for something they can use to justify what B's parents are demanding. Monday morning, I arrive at the school 40 minutes early. I need to make copies of all my documentation before students arrive. I'm standing at the copy machine when Delilah Connor walks into the teacher workroom. She's been teaching across the hall from me for 8 years. We usually chat about our weekends or complain about grading. But this morning, she walks straight up to me and lowers her voice. She says she thinks this whole investigation is ridiculous. She says everyone knows I'm a good teacher, and that what happened to B wasn't my fault. I feel tears starting and blink them back. Then Delilah says she's been warned by administration not to discuss it publicly. Harold told all the teachers at a staff meeting on Friday that talking about my case could interfere with the investigation. Delilah squeezes my arm and says she wanted me to know she's on my side even if she can't say it out loud. She leaves the workroom and I stand there holding my stack of copies. The support helps. But knowing my colleagues have been told not to talk about me makes everything feel more serious and more scary. My first period class is half empty. 6 students transferred out over the weekend. Their desks sit vacant in a cluster near the front of the room. The students who remain won't make eye contact with me. They walk in quietly and sit down and pull out their books. Nobody talks. Nobody asks questions. I can feel them wondering if their parents made the wrong choice keeping them in my class. I try to teach the lesson I planned on character development in To Kill a Mockingbird. My voice sounds hollow. The students take notes, but nobody participates in the discussion. When I ask a question about why Atticus makes certain choices, the silence stretches on for 30 seconds. Finally, one girl raises her hand halfway and gives a 1-sentence answer. The bell rings and they pack up faster than usual. I watch them leave and wonder how many more will transfer out after this week. I have 4 more classes today. I don't know if I can do this 4 more times. After school, I drive to the union office to meet with Nathan. The building is 20 minutes away in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. Nathan meets me in a small conference room with a table and 4 chairs. He has a yellow legal pad covered in notes. We spend 2 hours going over everything. He coaches me on how to answer questions factually without being defensive. He says the board will try to make me emotional, so I'll say something I regret. I need to stay calm and stick to the facts. When they ask why I let B take her backpack, I should explain that students often bring bags to the bathroom, and that I had no reason to suspect she was planning to leave. When they ask why I didn't report her missing sooner, I should explain that 40 minutes is a reasonable bathroom break, and that I reported it as soon as the bell rang. Nathan warns me that the board will try to find any policy violation they can use to justify the parents' complaints. They'll ask about bathroom pass procedures and classroom management, and whether I documented my conversation with B. I need to have clear answers ready. We practice responses until my throat is dry. Nathan says I'm doing well, but I can see the concern in his eyes. This is bigger than either of us wanted it to be. The first school board interview takes place Tuesday morning in a windowless conference room at the district office. The room has gray walls and a long table with chairs on both sides. Moira Grimes sits at the head of the table with 2 other board members. Nathan sits next to me. Moira opens a folder and pulls out several pages of typed questions. She asks me to describe in detail the 40 minutes between when B left my classroom and when I reported her missing. Her tone suggests I should have somehow known B wasn't coming back. I take a breath and explain that I continued teaching my lesson. I helped students with their reading comprehension worksheets. I answered questions about the upcoming essay assignment. When the bell rang at 2:55 and B's seat was still empty, I immediately reported it to the front office. Moira writes notes while I talk. She asks how many students typically take bathroom breaks during my class. I say it varies, but usually 2 or 3 per period. She asks how long they're usually gone. I say most return within 10 minutes, but some take longer. She writes this down like I've confessed to negligence. I feel my carefully prepared composure starting to crack. I explain that students sometimes take longer bathroom breaks, and I don't track every minute because they're teenagers who deserve basic trust. I can't stand outside the bathroom monitoring how long each student takes. I have 28 other students in the classroom who need instruction and supervision. Moira asks if I have a bathroom pass system. I explain that students ask permission and I grant it unless I have a specific reason not to. She asks what would constitute a specific reason. I say if a student was being disruptive or if multiple students were already out of the room. She asks if either of those applied to B. I say no. She asks why I granted permission so easily. I feel heat rising in my face. The question implies I should have suspected something when a 16-year-old girl asked to use the restroom. I look at Nathan and he gives me a small nod. I take another breath and explain that B was a quiet student who rarely asked for anything. I had no reason to deny her request. Moira writes this down and I watch her pen move across the page. Every answer I give seems to make things worse. Nathan jumps in to clarify that district policy doesn't require teachers to track bathroom break duration. He pulls out a printed copy of the teacher handbook and reads the relevant section out loud. Teachers are expected to grant reasonable bathroom requests and report extended absences to administration. My reporting timeline was actually faster than average because I reported B missing as soon as the period ended, rather than waiting until the end of the day. Moira looks annoyed that Nathan is there. She shuffles her papers and says she appreciates the clarification, but that the board is focused on whether I exercised appropriate judgment in this specific situation. She moves on to questions about whether I noticed B's backpack. I admit I noticed, but didn't think it was suspicious because female students often bring bags to the bathroom for personal items. Moira asks what kind of personal items. I feel my face get hot. She's making me spell out that teenage girls sometimes need feminine products. I say that students have privacy needs and I don't interrogate them about what they bring to the bathroom. Nathan writes something on his legal pad. The interview continues for another hour, but I already know how this will end. They've decided I'm negligent, and nothing I say will change their minds. The interview drags on for another hour. Moira asks about my classroom management style. She asks about my attendance tracking system. She asks about my relationship with other students in third period. She wants to know if anyone else seemed close to B, or if I noticed her talking to anyone in particular. I tell her B sat alone and didn't socialize much with other students. Moira writes this down like it proves something. She asks if I thought it was strange that a 16-year-old girl had no friends in my class. I explain that some students are quiet and prefer to keep to themselves. Not every teenager is social and outgoing. Moira asks if I reported this social isolation to a counselor. I feel my jaw clench. I teach English to 140 students across 5 periods. I cannot refer every quiet kid to counseling just because they don't chat with their neighbors. Nathan finally calls an end to the interview. He says we've covered everything relevant to the investigation, and that further questions should be submitted in writing. Moira looks annoyed but agrees. She tells me the board will contact me about next steps. Nathan and I walk out of the building together. He tells me I did well, but that I let my frustration show a few times toward the end. He says I need to stay calm no matter how unfair the questions feel because they're looking for any reason to justify disciplinary action. I drive home feeling worse than I did before the interview. Every answer I gave felt wrong somehow. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. The next morning, I walk into school through the main entrance instead of the side door I usually use. I don't know why I changed my routine except that everything feels different now, and using the same door seems wrong somehow. The hallways are busy with students getting books from lockers and talking before first period. A few of them look at me and then quickly look away. I go straight to my classroom and close the door. I open my email and find 17 new messages. The first one is from a parent named Mrs. Shimizu, whose daughter is in my second period class. She writes that she's concerned about the investigation and wants to know if her daughter is safe in my classroom. She asks if I plan to continue teaching during the investigation or if I'll be taking leave. The second email is from Mr. Richmond, whose son is in fourth period. He writes that he's heard disturbing things about my supervision practices and wants assurance that I'm monitoring students appropriately. The third email is similar. So is the fourth. By the time I reach the 17th email, I'm shaking. These parents are treating me like I'm dangerous, like I did something wrong, like their children aren't safe around me. I close my email and put my head down on my desk. The bell rings for first period, and I force myself to stand up and unlock the door. Students file in and take their seats. The room feels emptier than it should. 6 students transferred out, but it looks like more are missing. I take attendance and mark 3 students absent. I start the lesson on symbolism in short fiction, but I can barely focus on my own words. I keep thinking about those emails. I keep seeing the words unsafe and negligent and supervision failure. During my planning period, the intercom buzzes. Harold's voice asks me to come to his office. I walk down the hallway feeling like I'm heading to my own execution. Teachers I pass in the hall don't make eye contact. I knock on Harold's door and he tells me to come in. He's sitting behind his desk looking uncomfortable. He gestures to the chair across from him and I sit down. He doesn't waste time with small talk. He tells me the superintendent called him this morning. B's parents are putting pressure on the district to suspend me while the investigation continues. They're threatening to go to the media if the superintendent doesn't take immediate action. Harold says the superintendent is resisting so far because there's no evidence I violated any actual policy. But the pressure is building and Harold wanted to warn me that suspension is a real possibility. I ask him what happens if I get suspended. He says it would be with pay while the investigation continues. But it would also make me look guilty. It would suggest the district thinks I did something wrong even if they haven't proven it yet. I ask Harold if he thinks I did something wrong. He doesn't answer right away. He looks at his hands and then back at me. He says he knows I'm a good teacher and that I've never had any issues before. But he also says this situation is complicated and that he has to think about what's best for the school. His answer feels like a knife in my chest. He's my principal. He's supposed to support his teachers. But he's already thinking about protecting himself and the school instead of defending me. Harold leans forward. He asks me directly if there's anything I'm not telling him about my interactions with B. Anything that might come out later that would make this worse. I stare at him. The question implies he's not sure he can trust me. It implies he thinks I might be hiding something. I tell him there's nothing. I tell him I've been completely honest about everything. He nods, but I can see the doubt in his eyes. He's hedging his bets. He's preparing for the possibility that the board finds against me and he needs to distance himself. I stand up and leave his office without saying anything else. I walk back to my classroom and close the door and lock it. I sit at my desk and try not to cry. Even Harold doesn't fully believe me. Even my own principal thinks I might have done something wrong. That afternoon, I'm grading essays when my phone buzzes with a news alert. I almost ignore it, but something makes me click on it. The headline reads, "Local teacher under investigation after student disappearance." My stomach drops. The article doesn't use my name, but it identifies me as a high school English teacher at my school. It says I'm being investigated for negligence after a student left my classroom and was found 3 states away with an adult man. The article includes quotes from B's parent. Her mother says I should have known something was wrong. She says a caring teacher would have stopped B from leaving. She says I let her daughter walk into danger without a second thought. Her father says I should be fired and that parents deserve teachers who actually care about student safety. The article mentions that the police investigation cleared me of any criminal wrongdoing, but that the school board is reviewing whether I violated district policies. It makes me sound guilty even while admitting there's no evidence. I read the article 3 times. Each time I feel sicker. This is how people will remember me now. Not as a teacher who loves her job and cares about students, As the teacher who let a kid disappear. The teacher under investigation. The teacher who might be negligent. I search for other articles and find 2 more local outlets covering the story. Both use similar language. Both quote B's parents extensively. Neither includes any statement from me or the school defending my actions. I look like I'm hiding. I look guilty. My phone rings. I don't recognize the number, but I answer anyway. A man's voice asks if this is me and uses my full name. I say yes. He introduces himself as Rory Gilbert from the local newspaper. He says he's writing a story about the investigation and wants to give me a chance to comment. I remember Nathan's advice. I tell Rory I have no comment. He asks if I deny the allegations. I say I have no comment. He asks if I think I could have done anything differently. I repeat that I have no comment. He thanks me and hangs up. I sit there holding my phone and knowing exactly how this will look. The teacher declined to defend herself. The teacher refused to comment. It will make me look guilty. Silence always looks like guilt. But Nathan said talking to reporters would be worse. He said anything I say will be twisted and used against me. So I said nothing, and now I'll look guilty anyway. By Friday, 3 more students have transferred out of my classes. I'm down to 20 students in 3rd period, and my other classes are shrinking too. During lunch, I hear 2 students talking in the hallway outside my classroom. One of them says her parents don't want her in a classroom where the teacher lets kids disappear. The other one says her mom is waiting to see what the school board decides before requesting a transfer. They're talking about me like I'm not even human. Like I'm just a problem to be solved. I pack up my things and leave school early. I tell the front office I'm sick. It's not exactly a lie. I feel sick. I feel like I'm going to throw up or pass out or both. I drive home and sit in my car in the parking lot. I can't make myself go inside, as I just sit there crying until my phone buzzes with a text from Delilah. She asks where I am. I tell her I went home early. She texts back that she's coming over. I tell her not to, but she doesn't respond. 20 minutes later, Delilah knocks on my car window. I unlock the door and she gets in the passenger seat. She doesn't say anything at first. She just sits there with me. Finally, she tells me we're going for coffee. I say I don't want coffee. She says too bad. She drives us to a coffee shop 3 towns over where nobody knows us. We sit in a corner booth and she orders us both drinks. She tells me that half the teachers at the school think this investigation is ridiculous. They think B's parents are scapegoating me to avoid facing their own failures. But they're scared to say so publicly. B's parents have been calling the school and threatening to go after anyone who supports me. They're threatening to file complaints against any teacher who speaks up. So everyone is staying quiet. Delilah says she feels terrible about it, but she has 2 kids and a mortgage and she can't risk her job. I tell her I understand. I do understand. But it still hurts. It hurts to know that people believe I'm being treated unfairly but won't say it out loud because they're protecting themselves. I ask Delilah what she would have done if B had left her classroom. Would she have noticed the backpack? Would she have stopped her? Delilah is quiet for a long time. Then she admits she probably wouldn't have noticed either. She says female students bring bags to the bathroom all the time and she never questions it. She says if a quiet student asked to use the restroom, she would have said yes without thinking twice. But then she says something that makes my chest tight. She says it doesn't matter what she would have done. It doesn't matter that most teachers would have handled it the same way. The parents need someone to blame, and I'm the easiest target. I was the teacher in the room when B left, so I'm the one who gets destroyed, even if I did everything right. Even if there was nothing I could have done differently. I'm the target because I was there. Delilah drives me back to my car. Before I get out, she tells me to hang in there. She says this will blow over eventually. But I don't believe her. Some things don't blow over. Some things stick to you forever. The school board scheduled the second interview for Thursday afternoon. I walked into the same windowless conference room with Moira already sitting at the head of the table. She had a thick folder open in front of her. Nathan sat down next to me and pulled out his own notes. Moira started asking questions about the 2 weeks before B disappeared. She wanted to know exactly when I first noticed changes in B's behavior. I told her it was early October when B started seeming distracted. Moira asked why I didn't contact her parents right away. I explained that students have off days, and I spoke to B privately first. Moira wrote something down and asked why I didn't report the phone use to administration. I said students look at phones all the time and we handle it in the classroom. Moira looked at me like I'd just admitted to ignoring a fire alarm. She asked if I realized that distraction and phone fixation could be warning signs. I wanted to say that every teenager in America shows those exact signs, but I kept my voice calm. I explained that I followed the protocol we're trained to use for students showing minor behavioral changes. I pulled B aside. I asked if she was okay. I offered support. I told her my door was open. Moira asked why that wasn't enough to make me escalate to a counselor. Nathan jumped in and said he had documentation. He pulled out a copy of the district training manual and showed Moira the exact page that describes the recommended approach for students displaying mild behavioral changes. The manual said teachers should first speak privately with the student and offer support. It said escalation to counselors should happen if behavior continues for more than 4 weeks or if the student shows signs of immediate crisis. I spoke to B after 2 weeks of changed behavior. She showed no signs of immediate crisis. I followed the protocol exactly. Nathan slid the manual across the table to Moira. She barely looked at it. She asked if I thought the protocol was adequate. I didn't know how to answer that. The protocol existed because the district created it. If it wasn't adequate, then that wasn't my fault. Nathan answered for me. He said the adequacy of district protocols wasn't relevant to evaluating whether I followed them. Moira moved on to different questions about whether I documented my conversation with B. I said I didn't write a formal report because the conversation didn't rise to that level. Moira asked how I decided what level required documentation. I explained that teachers have dozens of brief check-ins with students every week, and we can't file reports on all of them. Moira said maybe we should. The door opened and a woman I'd never seen before walked in. She introduced herself as Ainsley Lowry from the district attorney's office. She sat down across from me and opened her own folder. Ainsley asked if I'd received training on recognizing warning signs in students. I said yes during my certification program and through periodic professional development. She asked when my most recent training was. I said 2 years ago during a mandatory workshop on student mental health. Ainsley asked what specific warning signs we were taught to recognize. I listed them: sudden grade drops, withdrawal from friends, changes in appearance, expressions of hopelessness, self-harm indicators, giving away possessions. Ainsley asked if B showed any of those signs. I said she showed a grade drop and some distraction, but nothing else on the list. Ainsley asked if distraction plus grade drops should have triggered more concern. I said it can indicate many things, including lack of sleep or stress at home or friendship problems. So Ainsley asked if I considered that it might indicate something more serious. I said I considered it, which is why I spoke to B. Ainsley leaned back in her chair and asked about liability. She wanted to know if I understood that the district could be held responsible if a teacher fails to recognize warning signs. Nathan objected and said we weren't here to discuss hypothetical liability. Ainsley said it wasn't hypothetical because B's parents were threatening legal action. She looked directly at me and asked if I received adequate training to handle situations like this. I realized what was happening. The district was trying to figure out if they could blame me to avoid a lawsuit. If they could say I wasn't properly trained, then they could claim my failure wasn't their fault. If they admitted the training was adequate, then they'd have to defend their protocols. Nathan asked for a break. Moira looked annoyed but agreed. Nathan and I walked into the hallway. He closed the door behind us and kept his voice low. He said the district was in a bad position. B's parents were threatening to sue for negligence. The district had to decide whether defending me or sacrificing me was the safer choice financially. He said it wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about money and liability and which option cost less. I felt sick. My stomach turned and I had to lean against the wall. 14 years of teaching. 14 years of showing up every day and caring about students and doing everything right. It might all end because firing me was cheaper than fighting a lawsuit. Nathan saw my face and promised the union would fight any termination. He said we had a strong case because I followed all the rules. But we both knew that didn't guarantee anything. School boards make political decisions. They protect the district first. Nathan asked if I was ready to go back in. I nodded even though I wasn't ready. We returned to the conference room and sat back down. Ainsley asked her trap question immediately. She wanted to know what I would do differently if I could go back to that day. Any answer would make me look guilty. If I said I'd stop B from taking her backpack, then I was admitting I should have done that. If I said I'd call her parents, then I was admitting I should have escalated. If I said nothing, then I looked defensive. Nathan answered before I could speak. He said hindsight isn't the standard for evaluating teacher conduct. He said I followed all applicable policies at the time based on the information available. He said asking what I would do differently was irrelevant to determining whether I acted appropriately. Ainsley wrote something in her notes. Moira closed her folder and said the interview was over. She didn't say when I'd hear their decision. She didn't say what would happen next. Nathan and I walked out to the parking lot. He told me to go home and try not to worry. I drove home in a fog. I couldn't focus on the road. I kept replaying Ainsley's questions about liability. I pulled into my apartment complex and saw my landlord standing by my door. She walked over to my car before I could get out. She said she'd been getting phone calls. People in the community were calling to tell her I was under investigation. They wanted her to know she had a negligent teacher living in her building. She asked if I was going to lose my job. She said she needed to know because if I couldn't pay rent, then she had to make other arrangements. I told her the investigation wasn't finished. She said she hoped it worked out, but she had a business to run. I went inside and sat on my couch. I opened my laptop and started looking at job postings in other districts. I spent the entire weekend filling out applications. Every application asked if I'd ever been under investigation. I had to check yes and explain the situation. I knew it didn't matter what I wrote. No principal wants to hire a teacher accused of negligence. Parents would find out and demand transfers. The accusations would follow me everywhere. I applied anyway because I needed a backup plan. Monday morning, I arrived at the school early. I walked down the empty hallway toward my classroom. Someone had spray-painted words on my door. The graffiti called me a terrible teacher. It said I didn't care about students. Harold was already there with a maintenance worker scrubbing it off. He saw me and said he was reviewing security footage. He promised they'd find whoever did it. We both knew it was probably a student whose parents had been talking about the investigation at home. The maintenance worker finished cleaning and walked away. Harold stood there looking uncomfortable. He said he was sorry this was happening. He said the district was doing what they thought was necessary. He didn't say he believed I did anything wrong. He didn't say he was fighting for me. He just said he was sorry and walked back to his office. I walked into school Tuesday morning and found a substitute teacher standing outside my fourth period classroom. She introduced herself and said the front office told her to cover my class. I asked why, and she said she didn't know. I went straight to the main office, and the secretary told me the superintendent needed to see me immediately. She wouldn't tell me what it was about. I grabbed my bag and drove to the district office building downtown. My hands shook on the steering wheel. The superintendent's assistant walked me into his office without making me wait. He sat behind his desk with a folder in front of him and told me to sit down. He opened the folder and pulled out several pages of printed text. He said B's parents filed a formal complaint with the state education board. I felt my stomach drop. He explained that this was separate from the local investigation and that it escalated everything beyond the district level. The state board had authority over teaching licenses across the entire state. He said the complaint alleged I failed to provide adequate supervision and ignored warning signs of a student in crisis. These were serious charges that could result in sanctions against my teaching license even if the district cleared me. I asked what kind of sanctions, and he said it ranged from mandatory training to suspension or revocation of my license. And I couldn't teach anywhere in the state without a valid license. He kept talking about liability and district protection and legal exposure. I interrupted him and asked directly if he believed I did anything wrong. He stopped talking and looked at me for several seconds. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He finally said it didn't matter what he believed because the district had to protect itself. His honesty was somehow worse than if he'd just lied and said he supported me. I left his office and sat in my car in the parking lot. I called Nathan and told him everything. He swore under his breath and said he would make some calls. He told me to go home and wait to hear from him. I drove back to my apartment and spent the rest of the day staring at my phone. Nathan called that evening and said he scheduled a meeting with a union lawyer who specialized in licensed defense cases. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon at the union office. He said this lawyer handled state board investigations regularly and would know how to fight this. Thursday came and I met Nathan in the lobby of the union building. He walked me upstairs to a conference room where a woman in her 50s sat reviewing papers. She introduced herself and shook my hand. She had my personnel file spread across the table. She asked me to sit down and tell her everything from the beginning. I went through the whole story again. She took notes and asked specific questions about my teaching practices and classroom management. She wanted to know about my training and professional development. She asked about my evaluations and any prior incidents. I told her I had 14 years of positive evaluations and 0 complaints. She nodded and made more notes. She reviewed my personnel file for several minutes without speaking. She finally looked up and said my record was strong. But she warned me that state boards sometimes made examples of teachers in high-profile cases to show they took student safety seriously. She said the investigation could take months, and that I should prepare for a long fight with no guaranteed outcome. She asked if I was ready for that, and I said I didn't have a choice. She said that was the right answer. She told me she would file a response to the complaint and request all documentation from B's parents. She said we would build a defense showing I followed every applicable policy and acted reasonably based on the information available at the time. Nathan asked about timeline, and she said state boards moved slowly. We might not get a hearing date for 6 months or longer. I felt sick thinking about 6 more months of this hanging over me. I returned to the school Friday morning. I walked down the hallway toward my classroom and saw a group of teachers standing near the main office. They stopped talking when they saw me and looked away. I kept walking. Delilah caught up with me before I reached my room. She pulled me aside and told me something I needed to know. She said someone started a petition calling for my firing. It was circulating online and already had over 200 signatures from community members. Most of them had never met me or had children in my classes, but they read about the case in the newspaper. Delilah showed me the petition on her phone. The language called me negligent and dangerous. It said I put students at risk and should never be allowed near children again. I handed her phone back and leaned against the wall. She asked if I was okay, and I said I didn't know. She told me several teachers wanted to start a counter-petition supporting me, but Harold warned them it would be seen as taking sides and could put their own positions at risk. I told her I understood. She said she was sorry and walked away. I stood in the empty hallway feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I made it through my morning classes by going through the motions. During lunch, I checked my email and found a message from someone named Trish Sharma. She said she was a parent at the school and wanted to meet for coffee to discuss my situation. I didn't recognize her name. I forwarded the email to Nathan and asked if I should respond. He called me 20 minutes later and said I should hear her out. He suggested meeting at a neutral location after school. I replied to Trish and agreed to meet at a coffee shop 3 blocks from campus at 4 o'clock. I spent the rest of the day wondering what she wanted and whether this was some kind of trap. I arrived at the coffee shop early and sat at a table near the window. Trish walked in exactly at 4. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat style. She wore business clothes and carried a leather bag. She ordered coffee and sat down across from me. She thanked me for meeting her and said she knew this must be difficult. I asked how I could help her. She explained that her daughter had B in several classes and knew the whole story about Doug and the months of planning. Her daughter told her everything about how B talked about this guy she met online and how she was planning to leave. Trish said B's parents were using me as a target to avoid facing their own failure to monitor their daughter's online activity and whereabouts. She said it was easier for them to blame a teacher than admit they had no idea what was happening under their own roof. I asked why she was telling me this. She said because what was happening to me was wrong and she wanted to help. She offered to speak at the next school board meeting on my behalf. She explained that she was a lawyer and knew how to handle these situations. She thought public support from a parent might counter the story that all parents wanted me fired. I didn't know what to say. I asked why she would risk getting involved. She said because her daughter loved my class, and because someone needed to stand up and tell the truth. She said she'd been watching this whole thing unfold, and it made her sick how people were treating me. I felt tears starting and tried to stop them. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said I didn't have to decide right now, but to think about it and let her know. She gave me her card and stood up to leave. I thanked her, and she said she hoped I would let her help. I drove home after meeting Trish and sat in my car outside my apartment building for 20 minutes. I wanted to believe that her offer to speak at the board meeting could actually change something. I wanted to believe that one parent standing up and telling the truth would matter more than the noise from B's parents. But I had watched this whole thing unfold for weeks now, and I knew how people chose sides based on emotion instead of facts. I finally went inside and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring, and I told him about Trish's offer. He asked what I thought about it, and I admitted I was scared to hope. He said that was understandable, but that I should let her help anyway. He explained that parent advocates could be powerful in the school board politics, especially when they were as articulate and credible as Trish. He said the board members lived in this community, and they knew which parents had influence and which ones were just making noise. He told me to email Trish and accept her offer. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time before I finally typed out a message thanking her and saying yes. The school board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening. I arrived 15 minutes early with Nathan and found the parking lot already full. We had to the park 2 blocks away and walk back. The meeting room was in the district office building, and when we got there, the hallway was packed with people waiting to get in. I recognized some faces from the school, but most were strangers who probably just wanted to watch the drama unfold. Nathan guided me through the crowd, and we found seats in the 3rd row. B's parents were already there in the front row with their lawyer. Her mother turned around and stared at me with pure hatred in her eyes. I looked away and tried to focus on breathing. The board members filed in at exactly 7 and took their seats at the long table in front. Moira sat in the center and called the meeting to order. She went through some routine business first, and I barely heard any of it. My hands were shaking, and I kept wiping them on my pants. Finally, Moira announced that they would now hear public comments regarding the investigation. She called B's parents to speak first. B's mother walked to the podium with her husband right behind her. She had notes on index cards, and she started reading from them in a voice that shook with emotion. She talked about how B was traumatized by what happened with Doug. She talked about how their daughter would never be the same. She talked about the nightmares and the therapy sessions and the fear that B felt every day. Then she said that none of this would have happened if I had been paying attention. She said a good teacher would have noticed the signs. She said a responsible teacher would have stopped B from leaving with her backpack. She said they wanted accountability, and that accountability meant my termination. She said their daughter deserved better than a teacher who didn't care enough to keep her safe. When she finished, half the room started clapping. I felt like I might throw up. Moira called the next speaker and Trish stood up. She walked to the podium carrying a folder and she looked completely calm. She introduced herself and explained that her daughter attended the same school and had classes with B. Then she started presenting facts. She said that B had admitted to police that she planned her departure for weeks and packed her bag the night before. She said that B specifically chose to leave during my class because it was late in the day and gave her the best head start. She said that according to the police report, B stated clearly that no teacher could have prevented her from leaving because she had been planning this for months. Then Trish looked directly at B's parents and said something that made the whole room go silent. She said it was interesting that they were blaming everyone except the 26-year-old man who groomed their daughter online for 8 months. She said it was interesting that they were demanding a teacher be fired for letting their daughter use the bathroom, but they weren't asking themselves how they missed their daughter talking to a grown man every single night. She said that maybe instead of looking for someone to blame, they should focus on supporting their daughter's recovery and making sure the actual predator faced justice. Then she sat down. Nobody clapped. The room was completely quiet. Moira looked uncomfortable and called the next speaker. A woman I didn't recognize walked to the podium and said her son had taken my English class 2 years ago. She said I was the teacher who finally made him enjoy reading. She said I spent extra time helping him when he was struggling, and that he still talked about books we read in class. She said she was horrified by what was happening to me, and that the community should be supporting me instead of trying to destroy my career. Another parent spoke after her. Then another. I sat there listening to people I barely knew defend me in front of the school board, and I started crying. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. Nathan handed me tissues and squeezed my shoulder. 5 different parents spoke on my behalf, sharing stories about their kids and positive experiences in my classes. I had no idea these people were planning to attend. I had no idea anyone beyond Trish was going to show up and speak for me. After the 5th parent finished, Moira tried to shut down the public comment period. She said they had heard enough perspectives and needed to move on with the agenda. But the board's vice president interrupted her. He was an older man named Gerald, who I had never paid much attention to before. He said that everyone who signed up to speak should be heard, and that cutting off public comment early would look bad for the board. Moira looked annoyed, but she agreed. 3 more parents spoke. Then a student who graduated last year showed up and talked about how I helped her get through a difficult time when her parents were divorcing. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the time it ended, my eyes were swollen from crying and my head was pounding. Moira announced that the board would review all testimony and evidence and make a decision within 2 weeks. She thanked everyone for attending and dismissed the meeting. I walked out into the parking lot with Nathan and stood under the streetlight trying to process what had just happened. He told me this was good. He said the board saw real community support, and that would matter in their deliberations. He warned me not to get too hopeful because school boards were unpredictable and political, and sometimes they made decisions based on what was easiest, rather than what was right. But I couldn't help feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe truth would actually matter. Maybe facts would outweigh emotion. Maybe I wouldn't lose everything over something I couldn't have prevented. I got to the school early the next morning and checked my email before first period. There was a message from a student named Vivian who had transferred out of my class 3 weeks ago. The subject line said, "I'm sorry." I opened it and read the whole thing twice. She wrote that her parents made her switch classes because they were scared after hearing about the investigation. She said she didn't want to leave and that she missed my teaching style. She said she hoped I would still be there when she could take English again next year. She said she was sorry for not saying anything before. I replied and thanked her for the message. I told her I understood and that I hoped to see her in class again someday. During my planning period, 2 students knocked on my door. They were both in my second period class and they looked nervous. I asked what they needed and they glanced at each other before one of them spoke. She said they wanted me to know they didn't believe the accusations. She said their parents were being ridiculous and overreacting. The other student nodded and said half the kids in the school knew this whole thing was unfair. I thanked them and they left quickly, like they were afraid someone might see them talking to me. Over the next few days, more students approached me privately with similar messages. They would catch me in the hallway or stay after class for a minute. They all said basically the same thing. They didn't think I did anything wrong. Their parents were being too protective. They hoped I wouldn't get fired. I was grateful for their support, but it made me sad that they felt like they had to keep it secret from their families. It made me sad that defending their teacher had become something they needed to hide. 2 weeks passed slowly. I taught my classes and went through the motions. I checked my email constantly, waiting for news from the school board. Nathan called me twice to see how I was holding up and to remind me that no news was normal at this stage. Finally, on a Friday afternoon, I got an email from the superintendent's office with an attachment. The subject line said, "School board decision." I stared at it for 5 minutes before I could make myself open it. The attachment was a 3-page document. I read the first paragraph 3 times before my brain could actually process the words. The school board found no evidence that I violated any district policies or failed to provide adequate supervision. They recommended no disciplinary action against me. I read it again to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I called Nathan and he answered immediately. I told him about the decision and he said he already knew because the board had notified the union. He congratulated me and said this was the best outcome we could have hoped for. But then I kept reading the rest of the document. The second page included language about reviewing bathroom pass policies district-wide. It talked about implementing additional training for all teachers on recognizing warning signs of students in crisis. It suggested that while I didn't violate existing policies, the district needed to examine whether current policies were sufficient to protect student safety. I felt my relief turn into something else. They were still suggesting I could have done something differently. They were still implying that better training or stricter policies might have prevented this. Nathan must have heard the change in my voice because he asked what was wrong. I read him the second page and he sighed. He said this was normal political cover. He said the board needed to show B's parents and the community that they were taking action even though they cleared me. He said the important thing was that I wasn't being disciplined and that my job was safe. He said to focus on that and not worry about the policy review language. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my empty classroom looking at the decision letter and trying to feel relieved. I was cleared. I could keep teaching, but somehow it didn't feel like the victory it should have been. I checked my email that night and found a press release from B's parents sent to every local media outlet. The statement called the school board's decision a cover-up and said they would take their fight to the state level. They accused the district of protecting a negligent teacher to avoid liability. They promised to keep fighting until I faced consequences for failing their daughter. I read it 3 times and felt something heavy settle in my chest. This was never going to end. No amount of evidence or official findings would change their minds because they needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. They would keep pushing until someone punished me, or until they ran out of legal options to pursue. I walked into my classroom the next morning expecting Harold or the superintendent to at least acknowledge that the board had cleared me. Neither of them said a word. Harold passed me in the hallway and nodded like it was any other Tuesday. The superintendent's office sent an email about upcoming professional development days, but nothing about the investigation. It felt like they wanted everyone to forget the whole thing happened, rather than admit I had been treated unfairly. I sat at my desk during planning period and realized the district had gotten what they needed. They could tell B's parents they conducted a thorough investigation while avoiding any admission that their teacher had been wrongly accused. Clearing me quietly meant they didn't have to take a stand or face backlash from parents who wanted blood. 3 students who had transferred out of my classes showed up at my door after school that week. They asked if they could come back for second semester. Their parents had submitted the paperwork already. None of the parents apologized directly or sent notes explaining their change of heart. The request just appeared in my inbox with no explanation. But I understood what they meant. These parents had panicked based on incomplete information and rumors. They had pulled their kids from my class to protect them from something that never existed. Now they were embarrassed but too proud to admit they overreacted. The transfer requests were the closest thing to an apology I would get. Delilah took me to lunch at a cafe 2 blocks from the school on Friday. She ordered wine even though it was 1 in the afternoon and told me we were celebrating the board's decision. I picked at my salad while she talked about how relieved she was that everything worked out. Then she got quiet and admitted something I had already figured out. She said she wanted to be more publicly supportive during the investigation, but she was afraid. She has 2 kids in elementary school and a husband who works for the same district. She couldn't risk her family's security by taking sides in something this messy. I told her I understood even though it had hurt at the time. I meant it too. I had learned during those weeks that self-preservation is a powerful thing, and most people will choose safety over solidarity when their own lives are on the line. A letter from the State Education Board arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks later. They were opening their own investigation based on B's parents' complaint. The union lawyer called me that same afternoon and explained that this was completely separate from the school board process. The state board has authority over teaching licenses, and they can impose sanctions even when local districts clear a teacher. I would need to provide written responses to all the allegations and submit documentation of my teaching practices. She said the process could take months, and that I should prepare for another round of stress and scrutiny. I hung up the phone and stared at the letter on my kitchen table. Just when I thought I could breathe again, the whole nightmare was starting over. I spent the next several weeks putting together my response to the state board. I documented every aspect of my teaching practice from the past 5 years. I included lesson plans and student feedback and performance data. I wrote detailed explanations of why I followed appropriate protocols when B left my classroom. I described the conversation where I offered her support and the timeline of when I reported her missing. The union lawyer reviewed everything and said we had a strong case. But then she warned me that state boards can be unpredictable. Sometimes they make decisions based on politics or public pressure rather than facts. I submitted the packet and tried not to think about what would happen if they decided to sanction my license anyway. 3 months after B disappeared, I got another letter from the state board. They dismissed the complaint without even holding a hearing. The letter said the allegations didn't meet the threshold for license sanctions and that they were giving appropriate weight to the local school board's findings. I read it twice to make sure I understood correctly. It was over. Actually, over this time. I called Nathan and he congratulated me and said this was the best possible outcome. But I didn't feel the relief I expected. The damage was already done in ways no official decision could fix. Some parents in the community would always wonder if I was really a negligent teacher who got away with something. My reputation had a stain that wouldn't wash off no matter how many investigations cleared me. Students who didn't know me would hear the story and form opinions based on rumors and half-truths. I had been teaching for 14 years with a perfect record, and now I would always be the teacher who was investigated after a student ran away. That label would follow me for the rest of my career, whether it was fair or not. Trish kept pushing for better policies around student safety and parental responsibility, even after the investigations ended. She started a parent group focused on online safety education. They held monthly meetings where experts talked about monitoring kids' internet use and recognizing warning signs of dangerous relationships. She turned her anger about B's case into something that might actually help other families avoid the same mistakes B's parents made. I went to one of the meetings and listened to parents ask questions about social media and chat apps. It felt strange watching them learn things B's parents should have known all along. I thought about leaving and starting over somewhere else. Other districts were hiring, and I could apply for positions where nobody knew my name or my story. But running away felt like admitting I did something wrong when I knew I didn't. This was my school and my community. I had taught here for 14 years and built relationships with hundreds of students and families. Leaving would let B's parents win by driving me out, even though every investigation cleared me. I decided to stay and keep teaching and let my work speak for itself. Some people would always believe the worst, but the students who actually sat in my classroom would know the truth. Harold stopped by my classroom on a Friday afternoon in late spring. The hallways were empty because most students had already left for the weekend. He stood in my doorway looking uncomfortable and asked if he could come in. I told him sure and put down the essays I was grading. He sat in one of the student desks, which looked too small for him. He said he wanted me to know that he was impressed by how I handled everything over the past several months. He said most teachers would have quit or transferred to another district, but I stayed and kept doing my job. He said the district could have done better supporting me during the investigation, and he wished things had gone differently. It wasn't exactly an apology, but I could tell it was as close as he could get without admitting the district made mistakes. I thanked him and said I appreciated him saying that. He nodded and left without adding anything else. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it mattered because Harold had avoided talking to me directly about the investigation since it started. The following August, I returned to the school for the new year. My class rosters were full with no gaps from transfer requests. Students filed into my classroom on the first day looking bored and tired like every first day of school. Nobody stared at me or whispered about last year. Nobody asked questions about B or the investigation. They just wanted to know what books we would read and how much homework I assigned. I realized that students had moved on completely. Last year's drama was ancient history to teenagers who lived in the present moment. I was grateful for their short memories and their willingness to judge me based on my actual teaching instead of rumors they heard from their parents. The year started feeling normal in a way I didn't think was possible after everything that happened. I started meeting with Nathan regularly, even though the investigation was over. He invited me to join a committee working on new district policies around parent complaints and teacher protections. Nathan said my case showed serious problems with how the district handled accusations against teachers. He said parents could file baseless complaints, and teachers had almost no protection until after investigations damaged their reputations. We spent months reviewing policies from other districts and drafting recommendations. The work felt important because I could help prevent other teachers from going through what I experienced. Nathan said the district was actually listening this time because they were worried about liability after how badly they handled my situation. I was teaching a lesson on integrity in October when a student raised her hand. She asked how we know what's really true when different people tell completely different versions of the same story. I stopped and thought about B's parents saying I was negligent while every investigation cleared me. I thought about the newspaper articles that made me sound careless, even though I followed every policy. I told the class that truth isn't always enough to change people's minds, because sometimes people believe what they want to believe regardless of facts. I said the only thing you can really control is your own integrity, and knowing you did the right thing even when others don't see it that way. The discussion that followed went deeper than any class conversation I'd had in years. Students talked about times they were blamed for things they didn't do, and how hard it was to defend yourself when people already decided you were guilty. They talked about standing up for truth even when it cost them friendships or got them in trouble. I realized that surviving the investigation made me a better teacher because I understood struggle and injustice in ways I didn't before. It cost me more than it should have, but I came through it still believing in my work and my students.